Acting Speaker.
Member for Kalamunda, you have the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Acting Speaker. Let me begin by acknowledging the anniversary this week of the tragic death of Jennifer and Gretel Pateljas. Their death and the failures of systems that should have protected them weigh heavily on this parliament and on all of us who have a duty to ensure that our laws are strong, effective and deliver safety where it is most needed. I want to extend my thoughts to their loved ones, to Rowena and Ariel Bombara, and to all families who have experienced loss through preventable violence. There is no greater responsibility of government than to keep its people safe, and that includes making sure that firearms are only in the hands of responsible and fit individuals. That is why the Liberal Party has supported and continues to support the modernisation of Western Australia's firearm laws. Our goal is simple: to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and to build a safer community. With that responsibility comes a second obligation: to ensure that new laws and regulations are practical, workable and respectful of the people and institutions who help enforce them. The regulatory framework introduced under the Firearms Act 2024 has created a number of real and serious concerns, and those concerns deserve a measured, considered response. Before entering Parliament, I served for many years in the health system, including as the state's heart transplant pharmacist and the chief pharmacist for the WA Country Health Service. I worked alongside general practitioners, nurses and health professionals in both metropolitan and regional areas. I know the pressure they face and the care they take in balancing medical ethics, patient confidentiality and community safety. That is why I want to focus much of my contribution today on the Firearm Authority Health Assessment, or FAHA. It's one of the most consequential aspects of the new regulatory framework, and it is clear from the feedback we have received that there are concerns it will not function and isn't functioning as intended. The requirements for the FAHA is set out under Section 148 of the Firearms Act 2024 and further detailed in Regulations 221 and 222 of the Firearms Regulation 2024. Regulation 221 defines the Firearm Authority Health Standards, requiring a person to be mentally and physically capable of continuously, safely and responsibly possessing and using a firearm. Regulation 222 outlines the factors the Commissioner must consider when assessing a person against those standards, including any history of mental illness, medications, alcohol or drug use, physical disabilities or cognitive impairment. On paper, this is a measure designed to strengthen safety. But in practice, we hold concerns that this process is burdensome, ambiguous and fraught with risk for both the medical profession and the public. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, RACGP, WA Division, has outlined a number of significant concerns with how the FAHA is being implemented. These are not ideological objections. They are practical, clinical and ethical concerns raised by health professionals who are being asked to carry an enormous burden under these regulations. Under the current system, GPs are expected to conduct a health assessment for anyone applying for or renewing a firearms licence.
Yes, Member for Armidale.
We heard an outstanding inaugural speech by the member, but it is general protocol and also under the standing orders that you can't just read out a speech in general debate. And the member at the moment is just reading word for word.
Stop doing it.
That is practice. Inaugural speeches you're allowed to.
Members, I'll hear the point of order. Members, I'll hear the point of order in silence. Thank you.
I know the Leader of the Opposition like to make fun of the book, but he might like to read. I know it doesn't have any pictures of himself in it, so he wouldn't be interested. But under General Order Number 1, it makes it quite clear, if you look at the footnotes, you cannot read a speech out word for word. And the member is doing it at the moment.
Member for Churchlands. Member for Churchlands. I will. Member for Churchlands.
You've got to look at the Speaker.
Show respect.
I'll hear the point of order in silence. My understanding would be that I would deal with one point of order at a time rather than enter into debate across the chamber, but let me just seek some further advice, please. All right, members, the conversation across the chamber. After seeking advice from the clerk, I'm going to rule that there's always been a convention in this place that whilst it is in the rules, yes, I have read that rule, Member for Armidale, and it is a rule, and I would encourage those on my left to read the rules in detail, including the footnotes, because they will give you a better sense of how this place operates. But there is a convention in this place, particularly for new members who may be speaking for, the first, second, third time, that they may speak from notes and they may quote from notes. So I'm not going to uphold that point of order at this point in time in that way. Yes, Member for Armidale?
Yes, of course you can use notes and speak from notes, but you can definitely not. Is it rule number one?
Member for Churchlands, member for Midwest. Can I hear the member for Armidale's point of order, please?
Acting Speaker, it's rule number one. It quite clearly states that members cannot read out speeches, except obviously a minister who's reading out from in regards to a bill. And obviously there's leeway when you do an inaugural speech. Obviously you can read. Obviously you can refer to notes. You can even read paragraphs. But at the moment, the member for Kalamunda, who I have great respect for and who I think is incredibly capable, is reading word for word a speech. That is not allowed under the rules. It's not a convention, it's actually a rule.
Member for Armidale, I understand your point and your argument. There is a rule around not reading speeches in the standing orders. However, given how we have operated in the practice based on advice that I've received from the clerk, I'm not going to... Member for Churchlands, I can call you to order if you'd like. So I'm not going to strictly interpret that. However, perhaps members on my left could, in keeping with the spirit of the rules of this place, first of all read them cover to cover, including the footnotes. Thank you, Member for Central Wheatbelt. I can call you as well, please. So I would encourage everyone to look to the rules and to seek to follow them, particularly when you're on your feet speaking. So I return back to the member for Kalamunda. You've got the call.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. The RACGP has made it clear that many doctors are uncomfortable being placed in the position of making judgment about impulse control or future risk of harm. We also need to acknowledge the pressure being placed on general practitioners who choose not to undertake assessments. In some communities, that's already creating tension and, in most more concerning cases, hostility. That is not a sustainable situation. It risks undermining the safety and well-being of health professionals, particularly in small practices and rural towns, where personal and professional boundaries are already difficult to manage. And we need to be honest about the reality of what we're asking of them. Picture the GP with a patient sitting in front of them, someone they've maybe treated for years, someone that they've played bowls with every Friday night for that time. What are they meant to do? The minister can say that the doctor isn't making the final licensing decision, but in that moment, the decision they make feels incredibly important to the doctor and to the patient. Doctors are expected to assess physical and mental health history and make a judgment about whether a person meets the standards under Regulation 221. However, unlike with driving and aeronautical assessments, there is no accompanying evidence framework for how to conduct that assessment. There is no clear definition of what constitutes a disqualifying condition, no thresholds, no training and no resources, just a form and a high-stakes judgment call. And there is no framework for consistent, fair or transparent outcomes across the system. And yet, under Regulation 222, the Commissioner must take into the account the information provided by a medical practitioner when deciding whether a person meets health standards, effectively giving doctors a critical role in determining someone's suitability to hold a firearm authority. Health professionals are also concerned about the legal implications of these assessments. Now, the Act provides some legal protection for health practitioners acting in good faith, but many GPs remain unsure about how those protections will extend. The RACGP has called for more clarity, and rightly so. Even more troubling is the impact this process may have on patient behaviour. The RACGP has warned that mandatory assessments of this kind could discourage individuals from seeking help for mental health concerns. And when a GP does determine that a referral to a specialist, such as a psychiatrist or geriatrician or psychologist, is clinically required, that brings challenges too. Wait times for these services can be lengthy, especially in regional areas, and the added costs fall entirely on the applicant. For many, that makes the process not just uncertain, but potentially financially out of reach. Now, Deputy Speaker, I remind this place that this is not proposed regulation, this is active in our community right now. That is not a hypothetical risk. We have heard of cases where people have avoided counselling, grief support, or even general health checkups because they fear the consequences on their firearms licence. We cannot allow a regulatory regime to create a barrier to care. This is particularly sensitive, in rural and regional communities. In small towns where there may only be one GP, the relationship between a doctor and their patient is deeply personal and often built on trust. Think for a second of an old farmer, someone who already finds it difficult enough to make the trip to town, down to the clinic for a health checkup, let alone to talk about their mental health. It's only because of the trust built with their doctor, often over decades, that they might feel safe enough to have that conversation at all. What do these regulations do to that trust? What message does it send when every appointment risks becoming a licensing assessment? Of course, people are going to turn away, and when they do, it's not just the health that suffers, it's the very system we rely on to keep communities safe. In other areas, aviation, driving, even recreational...
Minister. Point of order.
I can't hear. I'm sitting right behind the member for Kalamunda. I can't hear for the former Minister for Police's loud speaking in his chair.
Right, so I want to uphold the point of order. Thank you. Member for Kalamunda.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In other areas, aviation, driving and even recreational diving, we have well-developed, evidence-based medical assessment standards. The Firearms Regulations provide nothing comparable. No thresholds, no objective criteria, just a broad obligation to assess fitness with serious implications for both the patients and public safety. The RACGP has not opposed the concept of firearm health assessments. What they have asked for is reasonable. They have asked for clear evidence-based health standards and guidelines, recognition that GP assessments should be advisory, not determinative, the ability to refer patients to appropriate specialists such as psychiatrists or geriatricians where appropriate, potentially the formation of a support line for GPs with questions regarding the FAHA, and above all, assurance that patient confidentiality and the therapeutic relationship will be respected. These requests are not obstacles to reform. They are the building blocks of sound, evidence-based regulation. In the absence of binding standards or support, these requests should be seen not as resistance, but as a call for safe and responsible implementation. I also want to address concerns around pest control and the euthanasia of animals, particularly those raised by landowners, primary producers and of wildlife carers. Under Regulations 76 to 81, professional shooters who euthanize animals are subject to detailed business licence requirements. Regulation 76 defines euthanasia as part of a professional shooting service, while Regulation 81 requires meticulous record keeping for each activity, including the property address, the reason for shooting and details about the client. These are onerous requirements. They may be appropriate for formal commercial operations, but we have heard from regional stakeholders, animal welfare volunteers and industry bodies who say they can no longer respond quickly to injured livestock or native wildlife. I've worked on farms with my parents and grandparents. I've seen firsthand the realities of livestock management, and that includes at times the deeply unpleasant but necessary act of euthanasing an animal using a firearm. It is never a task taken lightly. It is an absolute last resort, used only when an animal is suffering, and the most humane outcome is a quick and dignified end. The expectation that a licensee must record the information of euthanasing an animal for a period of 5 years, including the address and shooting where it occurred, is simply an overreach. Let me be clear, that level of red tape might suit a bureaucrat in West Perth, but it bears no resemblance to the realities of regional or pastoral life. If a kangaroo is hit by a car on a country road and a trained volunteer or local landowner steps in to humanely end its suffering, they could technically be breaching the law if they haven't logged the activity and recorded the details of the customer. That's not public safety, that's highly unnecessary bureaucracy. Likewise, wildlife carers who work with authorities to ease the suffering of native animals deserve support, not fear of legal risk. This is a core animal welfare issue. Primary producers and regional communities are desperate for a resolution in this space, not because of politics or paperwork, but because it's the decent, moral, ethical thing to do. These are people acting out of compassion, duty and care. The current regulations don't recognise that. They constrain it. And finally, I want to acknowledge the feedback from our frontline police officers. Police have outlined the increased administrative burden created by this new framework. Officers are being drawn away from core duties to manage firearms compliance, with some concerns regarding the access to proper systems or clarity around certain processes. Good reform depends on good implementation. When new regulations are introduced without clear guidelines, without proper systems...
Ministers, thank you. Thank you.
And
for Bateman. Minister for Emergency Services, thank you.
And without meaningful engagement with those expected to enforce them, we risk undermining public trust and public safety alike. And we place an unreasonable burden and pressure on police, who are expected to make workable the unworkable. So today I support this disallowance.
Please continue.
Not because I oppose the intent of the regulations, but because I believe that we can do better. We must do better. We owe it to the community, to our health professionals and to those who suffered loss due to preventable violence. Let's work together to ensure that our firearms laws are strong, fair and effective. Let's ensure that they are informed by evidence and delivered with respect for the professionals and communities that they affect. And let us do so in the spirit of bipartisanship and shared responsibility for the safety of all Western Australians.